Grade school! What the heck is going on, guys? Happy Friday morning. Happy post-Thanksgiving Friday. How is everyone? Happy Black Friday. Have you guys bought up all the gear in the universe? I haven't made any Black Friday purchases yet, but I don't really need anything at the moment, but we'll see if I make it to the end of the day. Gadali, have you made any Black Friday grabs yet?
I have not. I'm eyeing a few things and I'm debating whether I really need them, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, same. I'm not even debating. I pretty much know I don't, but that doesn't mean that I won't buy them. So
Yeah.
we shall see. Hi, everybody. I'm glad y'all are here. It looks like we've got a pretty formidable assembly of color ninjas this morning. I'm glad everybody's here. We're going to have a good session. We're going freestyle today. So let's get into it. I've got one thing that I want to start off by discussing before we start taking everybody's questions. And then did just want to let you guys know while we're on the topic of Black Friday, we are running a sale on my core elements LUTs for Black Friday. So if you are on my mailing list, you'll get more info about that. If you're not on my mailing list, go download one of the cool free things that I offer, and you'll be on the mailing list and hear from me, hopefully with some fun emails as a bonus. And of course, if you subscribe and you don't want anything after the Black Friday deal or after the free LUT or the free exposure chart or the mid-grade cheat sheet or any of that cool stuff that I supply, you can always unsubscribe and I won't bother you anymore, and we can still be friends, and it won't be awkward when we pass each other in the hall and stuff like that. So go check out the Core Elements LUTs if you want to get those at a discount for Black Friday. It's the deepest discount that I believe we've run on them, and it's a tool that I'm really excited to put in everybody's hands. So go check it out. Let's talk about some color grading stuff. So it looks like everyone's already got some questions coming in. I want to start by answering a question that came in through my Discord community. And it was a really good one. It was basically asking to explain the timeline working luminance setting in Resolve in a bit more detail than maybe we have in prior episodes of grade school. So I thought we could start by taking a look at that. Let's get into Resolve World. All right, so I'm in a Resolve project. I'm in a program called DaVinci Resolve, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's used for color grading, and as I always forget because I'm so siloed in my color grading world, it's also used for like sound mixing and like editing and stuff. Oh, Gadali, are you doing your whole movie that you're working on right now? Is that all happening in Resolve?
Yeah, absolutely everything from prep and media management all the way to editing, sound, color, VFX, completely unresolved.
This is unreal to me, man. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm an old person every time I echo it, but like this free tool is better than the most expensive tool you could lay hands on when I started at film school. Pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, we're going to hang out in the color corner because, as you guys know, one of my favorite sayings is that an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less. And I definitely think that describes me, at least the less and less part. So let's take a look at, oh, geez, I don't know. Let's go to this red shot for a second here. And I'm in a new project, so I'm not even going to worry about my nodes quite yet. But the setting that we wanted to take a look at here is in our project settings. So I'm going to go to File, Project Settings, with the little gear icon down there at the lower right, or Shift-9 if you're a keyboard shortcut person. And if we look at our color management settings, what we're looking at right here are like my stock color management settings. These are the same ones that I show like in my DaVinci Wide Gamut Workflow series, and that hopefully most of y'all here today have at least heard me reference once or twice before. But if not, you can sneak a peek right now while I'm on the screen for a minute. And if I'm not on here long enough and you want to see these settings again, or you want to get a bit more insight into why I'm putting all these other settings as I am, go check out that DaVinci Wide Gamut Workflow series. It's a great place to dive into color management, how to use Resolve color management specifically, or DaVinci Wide Gamut. It's kind of the same thing, at least quite overlapping, and why we want to put our settings and drop-down menus in certain positions. But for today, the question was about timeline working luminance and where we might want to park this. This is actually, like if any of y'all have watched that DaVinci Wide Gamut Workflow series, you know that I really emphasize like, okay, if this all looks super overwhelming and you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to fill all that stuff in. I just thought I was here to make some pretty pictures, and now you got me filling out forms. I don't want to do that. What's the cheat sheet here? The cheat sheet that I always try to give y'all is like, okay, get this right, and get that right. And the rest of these things, yes, they make an impact, but they don't make nearly the impact as those three things: input color space, timeline color space, and output color space. Okay. That's always like the anchor or the foundation that I try to lay when we're talking about this big list of options and all the ways we could configure it. You get those things right, it's hard to produce a really, really bad color management pipeline. If you get them wrong, it's pretty hard to produce a decent looking color management pipeline. But if you were to give me, okay, Cullen, you can have control over a total of 4 of these parameters: input, timeline, and output color space. Probably the next one that I would choose would be timeline working luminance. It's actually a very critical menu item. And let's just look at an extreme example of something for a second. So I'm looking at this shot right now of this woman in this sort of church cathedral environment. And I chose it because there's not a ton of like really hot values in there, but you can see there's like, you know, speculars from these light sources that are in frame, and there's a good bit of light coming in up here. So to make timeline working luminance obvious to understand what it's doing, let's just flip to the lowest possible setting, SDR 100, okay? And let's pay special attention to these little sources in the frame. And we might have to do this once or twice depending on how big your screen is. So when I do that, you can see that I have, and actually we're gonna do one other thing here as well, guys. I'm gonna set an output DRT here to none, just for the moment. Actually, am I going to do that? No. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm glad this question came up because that did not do what I would have expected it to do. I'm going to pause on the visual example I was going to make and give you some insight into what's going on under the hood. So timeline working luminance essentially refers to, you know, we've talked a lot when we talk about color management, we've got our source color space. That's what our camera is, right? We've got our destination color space. That's what like Rec 709 might be, or P3000 nit for like an HDR type of thing, or a P348 nit for like a theatrical projection. We've got different output color spaces as well. And then in color management, what we often find, or what we find pretty early when we start to dabble with color management pipeline, is there's a ton of benefit to having a working or an intermediate color space where it doesn't matter where we're coming from, it doesn't matter where we're going. For one beautiful, bright, shining moment, all of the images are going to be in one common metric, and that common metric is going to be nice and big, nice big color space where all the colors can fit and be pushed around, and we can move exposures. Everything's photometric. Everything is like holding all of the original scene data regardless of where that scene data came from, meaning which camera. It's all living together in one great big sort of gym, if you will, or like a kitchen, a place where things can be moved around and cooked with plenty of room to spare, right? So when we look at our timeline color space, we've selected that here. We've said DaVinci wide gamut intermediate. That is indeed a big kitchen for us to cook in, right? DaVinci wide gamut has a huge color volume, meaning that the reddest red and the greenest green and the bluest blue that we can produce within that color space are very vibrant. In fact, far more vibrant than any display can reproduce. And that's a good thing because we actually want, as we're moving through our imaging pipeline, we want to start with a big, wide gamut, high dynamic range capture. And then by the time we get to our display, to confine those values down to what our display can actually show us, right? That's a functional form of the pipeline sort of tapering as we go from source to display. The opposite would, of course, not be nearly as fun, where it's like, you know, think about if you were grading an HDR movie and you've got one shot in that HDR movie that is like something that someone shot on their iPhone. I've been in that scenario more than once in my career. And then you have to figure out, oh, so it's starting small, and I have to figure out how to sort of stretch the fabric back out without tearing it so that this image can inhabit the larger color space of the display, right? That's not so much fun. The other way is the preferable route. We want to be starting big and working our way small. So the reason I bring all this up is because that's one of the things that works really well about Resolve Color Management, and specifically working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. It's a big, broad color space, right? Now, DaVinci Wide Gamut is the color gamut component of that, as the name implies. DaVinci Intermediate is the tone curve. It's a log tone curve, has lots of dynamic range, the way something like LogC4 from the new Alexa 35 might have lots of dynamic range, or Red Log 3G10 or SLog 3 have lots of dynamic range. DaVinci Intermediate has lots of dynamic range. Specifically, it is spec'd to give us a range of 0 to 10,000 nits. How bright is 10,000 nits? Really bright. 10,000 nits is like, you know, I'll put it this way. There's nothing in this scene that probably reaches 10,000 nits. Maybe these light sources in the frame, probably not even those. 10,000 nits is like reflections that you would get off of a highly reflective object on a overcast day, if that makes sense. Very, very bright, okay? So that's good. We want to have that dynamic range that we can then compress down for SDR or HDR or wherever we're going. Now, timeline working luminance, what that is essentially doing is adding a governor. It's adding a ceiling within our DaVinci Intermediate working space. So that means that I am doing a couple of things, but the most important thing to me is when I have my timeline working luminance set at the normal position that I recommend to you guys of custom 10,000 nits, that's basically saying, hey, Resolve, on the journey from the camera into the working space, whatever that camera is, don't do anything to begin to compress the luminance. Leave the luminance linear, leave the full range of the luminance, leave it alone. I want to have all that scene data to work with in as close to its original state as possible. Now, as we bring this down, we are going to get less and less of a linear one-to-one relationship between the light the camera captured and the light that we are being given the controls to manipulate. Does that make sense? So this happens before I turn a single knob. This is setting an effective ceiling for how bright I can take something before it just starts to roll off. So let's go ahead and save this back at 100 nits and just take a look at what happens if we go, I don't know, let's go to our offset here and try to push it up. So I'm going really hard on that. Obviously, that's not the best looking adjustment I've ever made. But can you see how in the image, I'm just sort of like flattening out at the top? As opposed to, if we go back in here and set this timeline working luminance up to a custom, or up to, yeah, custom, but 10,000. Let's look at the difference. Let's do that again. I am going to set my output DRT back on for now. So we've got, there's our 10,000, and here's our 100. And I'm going to save that. See the difference? It's all getting clipped out at that ceiling far sooner. So the ceiling of my working space is much lower. So that's kind of a long explanation, but I kind of wanted to go into detail because, like I said, short of input color space, timeline color space, and output color space, this to me is the next most important thing. And I like to put it at 10,000 just because I don't see any advantage to compressing highlights before I've even had the opportunity to shape them. If they need to be compressed, I can compress them, or I can let my color management on the output side handle that compression, but I don't personally see any advantage to setting that compression. And the last thing, or to that compression being hard cooked in before I've even had a chance to grade the image. And the last thing I'll point out here is these sort of slash options, which can be a bit confusing. What these say is, so just easy example, SDR 100, this means that when you input map your source, Resolve is going to take whatever that source's peak luminance was and roll it down to 100 nits. Okay, so there's a maximum luminance of 100 nits for that source image, and you will never have access to more than that luminance anywhere in your grading pipeline. Okay, if we look at SDR ER 100/200, the first thing I said is still true. It's still going to roll things over to 100 nits, but the container, the operational space, the kitchen that we are cooking in will allow me, if I so elect, to push those highlights back up as hot as 200 nits before things begin to flatten out and roll off and just turn into a flat field of white, kind of like we're seeing in this image. Does that make sense? That's kind of like the one other note here that can be handy. There are plenty of colorists who use this, and I want to emphasize there's nothing wrong or right about one way of doing this versus the other. I'm just giving you my take as a professional and hopefully a little bit more bearing from which to make your own decision about what works best for your practice. Whew, I need to go take a nap. That's all for grade school today. We're done. I'm just kidding. Gadali, what else we got?
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in. Stars Art is wondering, is it okay to work in camera native space like red, white, gamut, log 3G10?
Yes, it absolutely is okay to work in native camera space. And I won't pause for the live delay to actually see responses come in. But before I put a little bit of meat on that answer, I just want everybody to think to yourselves, or you can certainly feel free to chime in the chat. I'm just not going to wait to read your answers in real time today. What would be the difference? Like, why bother with the intermediate space at all would probably be the best way to ask that question, because if we don't need it, then it's simpler to go without, right? Or in the case of this specific question, what would we be losing or altering about our grading workflow? Just think about that for yourself for a second, and then I'll give you some of my thoughts. And I'm going to turn that adjustment off. That's a little extra. That's a little much. So the two main things that I want to point out to you about working in your camera space as opposed to your, like common operational space. The first one is that, like we've talked about this before in grade school and in other videos, I'm big on feel when I'm grading. I feel like I sometimes get misconstrued as like a highly technical artist. I am very technical at the beginning of a process, but that's in service of getting highly creative during the process. I just want to be able to cruise and surf and play when I'm in the grade, when I'm doing my thing once the table's been set. And I've found that by always using the same intermediate working space, as opposed to letting that ever change depending on like, oh, this was shot red, this was shot airy or whatever, I develop a more intuitive connection and understanding of like, okay, I know what offset is going to do. I know how gain is going to respond or whatever in that space. It's small differences when you're talking about log spaces such as DaVinci Intermediate versus log 3G10, but there are differences. The other big difference would be in the shadow area. So I like to have a common working space for that reason. The other main reason is, as you guys know, I use LUTs and tools all the time to help me facilitate macro level creative transformations, right? Looks. Those are things that I don't want to have to change per project just because project A was shot on a red and project B was shot on a Sony. In an ideal scenario, I would be able to use the same set of tools, the same set of LUTs, the same set of transforms, no matter what the original source footage was. So you guys have probably heard me say some of those things before, but I wanted to recap some of the reasons why I would go to the extra trouble, the extra complexity of having that third intermediate working color space. But the short answer, the TLDR to the original question, can you do all of your grading in a like camera negative space? Yes, absolutely. And I've done that plenty of times in my career. The only other caveat would be you want it to be a sufficiently large color space, hopefully a log color space. But yes, you can absolutely feel free to do that.
Okay, question from Jim Robinson here. The community is still all about Rec 709A and whether to use that or not. Even Gamma 2.2 or 2.4 for web is debated daily. You mentioned a while back that you were doing some research. Has there been any results?
There have been results. And hi, Jim, by the way, and thanks for asking. I'll put it to you this way. My big goal, to put it in sort of sciencey terms, is, like science is all about, like a hypothesis or a solution. One of the big criteria for, like how effective it is, how useful it is its scope, right? So I would say that we have had a lot of success with figuring out how to nullify or to correct color management, like OS level color management. Like, for example, on this exact iMac that I am on right now, I can get a dead-on match to what I see on my reference monitor. I mean, I say dead-on. When I say dead-on, I mean like the measurement of difference would be the delta E of, like typically when we're calibrating a monitor, we look for delta E's of less than 2, because delta E's of less than 2 mean that it's generally not going to be a perceptible difference. I can get a low delta E value, very low delta E value. I can zero out the inconsistencies and the discrepancies of like the way that browsers color manage, the way that websites like YouTube or Frame.io or Vimeo color manage, the way that Mac OS color manages. I've got a pretty good grip on this exact iMac for how to zero that out. Now, have we figured out each of the levers that are that have an influence there, and how to pull them and where to position them so that we have a far-reaching but a simple scope solution to the problem? Not yet. We're getting there. I can tell you that it's not as simple as, spoiler alert, I know this won't come as a surprise to Jim and probably most of us in this room, but it's not as simple as the right combination of tag and encoding. If it was, then someone would have stumbled on like, hey, if you just do Rec 709 Gamma 24 with a Rec 709A tag, it will always look great on whatever monitor you look at all the time, right? Someone, if such a solution existed, someone would have found it by now, and they would have shouted it loud enough that people would have started trying it and adopting it, and sooner or later there would have been sort of a viral spread of like, hey, no, this just works and you can't break it. No such solution exists, which is why there's all of this debate and ongoing discussion about the best solutions, because different people can produce valid solutions or fixes for their problem set within their particular context. But what we're really looking for is like, hey, what would be a broad-reaching system that spans operating systems, that spans browsers, that spans websites, that spans displays, that ensures that whatever display my viewer is looking at that content on agrees to the extent that the display will allow it to agree with what was seen on the reference monitor when we mastered it in the grading suite. That's my holy grail that I do feel like we're chipping away at, but there's work to be done. So that's the latest update there.
Question from Kushik: is timeline working luminance and max luminance and tone mapping in the color space transform the same between color space transform and project settings?
They are related but different. I'll put it to you this way. Timeline working luminance is actually more akin to, if we were doing our color management, let's just bypass our color management for a moment and say we were going to do a version of that same color management in nodes here. Area wide gamut 3, area LogC 3, DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate. On this side, we're going to go DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate, Rec 709, gamut 24. The timeline working luminance is really more about this side of it, where we were saying, hey, luminance map on input from a max of whatever, 10K, down to a max of 100. That's really where that's coming into play. And it is going to be affected, like your tone mapping on this side can also have an effect. But it's really more about like that's kind of my beef with that timeline working luminance is it's rolling over the highlights in that image. It is de-linearizing those highlights right at the beginning before you even have the chance to operate on the negative. So it's really more like here where that timeline working luminance is applying the value that you have stipulated in your settings.
Question from Long Dancer: would love to know your thoughts on grading cinetone and SLog 3 footage on the same timeline, bringing each into DaVinci wide gamut. How would you set that up?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's funny you asked that because I haven't had any cinetone material for a while. Here's what I would probably do, and like, if time permitted, I would probably try to set myself up so that my SLog material was receiving a similar treatment to what the cinetone material did. So I don't know if you're shooting this material or if you might have a good relationship with the person who did, but what I would do is try to get hands on that transform that goes. Like there's basically a transform or a transform that could be devised to take you from SLog 3 out to cinetone. Because cinetone, as you might know, like it's not just a technical transform. It's kind of got some vibe to it. It feels like it's got kind of a filmic feel to it. And I actually think it's a pretty nice looking transform. So the hardcore geek in me would probably try to figure out like, hey, can I track down or calculate a transform so that I can apply it to my SLog material and get a good match to the cinetone in that way, rather than trying to unbuild all that cinetone stuff. And then on a more simple approach, I'm trying to think, because there's all this like creative character that's baked into that cinetone stuff. I would put it this way. I would color manage the cinetone as Rec 709. Okay, so input color space, Rec 709. Maybe that's 709 gamma 22, maybe 24, maybe Rec 709 scene, maybe Rec 709A. Just see which of these gives you the best starting point through your pipeline. And then don't apply any other character to that image. So you basically just want to end up with getting a net neutral round trip for your cinetone material. It's just that in between, you're getting the opportunity to grade in a wider color gamut and use your tools in a way you're familiar with. Make sense so far? That's what I would do with the cinetone material. Now, with the SLog material, I would color manage that exactly as you would expect. Input color space, SLog 3, SGamut 3 Cine, if that's what it is, SLog 3. And then here's what I would do. I would develop a macro level creative transform, a look, just for that material. Maybe create a group of like, hey, if it's this timeline, let's just say for simplicity's sake that the first 2 shots are my cinetone stuff and the rest of the timeline is SLog 3. I'd probably like create a group and call it my SLog material. And then here in the group post clip, I would try to look at taking, okay, what else needs to happen to make my baseline transform out to Rec 709 for that SLog material to make that feel more like the cinetone stuff? And it's going to come down to a contrast curve with anchored middle gray, like we've talked about before. I'm just going to go into my DCTLs here, find my exposure chart. This folder needs a haircut. There we go. And go to DaVinci Intermediate. Total steps 1, no ramp. So now I've got a patch of mid-gray. I can use that to set my anchor for my creative contrast curve. I would find that contrast curve that just, eyeballing, like what makes it feel more like the cinetone stuff. Maybe something like that. Maybe, like back all of that off a little bit, down to like 80 or something like that. Then find, like, if memory serves, I've only done one thing on cinetone, but I remember really liking it. The other thing I think you'll find with cinetone that kind of gives it that more filmic character is going to be some amount of split toning. So again, I would just do a, like an anchored mid-gray, and then above and below, ungang things. Let me set my strength back to 100 on everything. And then, like go to the blue channel. Oh, it looks like I moved that a little bit. Oh, I see. Never mind. When I want to reset things, you can just hit Option on a control point, and that'll reset it. At least, yeah, there we go. And then what I would do for the split toning is just find some cocktail of like, like blue and green in the bottom, red and green in the top, scale it back as needed, but just try to visually match. Like those are the characteristics that in my mind's eye I associate with cinetone, and just try to get a match to those on your SLog material, and then don't apply that look to your cinetone. Does that make sense? That's a good question, because it's kind of an unusual use case of like, It's not just that it's Rec 709, it's that it's Rec 709 plus a vibe, plus a look. So you could, I would think ideally, you would roll with that vibe and match to that vibe as opposed to trying to unbuild or invert that vibe to get back to a pristine negative. I think that would be possible, but it would be a bigger challenge for sure. Hope that helps.
Question from Tree Movie. How major is the role of production LUT for a big movie like Marvel Productions? What's the role of the showLUT while on set and while grading? And do they use the same LUT for several shows or movies?
Oh, great question about the role of the showLUT in like bigger films. It's huge. It's really, really big. And it's big for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you want to learn more about this and hear more about this, you can go check out my conversation with my friend Jill Bogdanowicz, where we talked all about working with LUTs, and we talked about how the ultimate LUT that she graded Joker under, that was one of the big, topics of our conversation, was the grade for that film. There was a showLUT produced that aligned with what they ultimately graded that film under, that had a huge influence on cinematography and camera decisions. How do we expose? How much light do we need? Is the art department putting the right things at the right places in the frame? Are they the right color? All these kinds of things that are going to, your impression of those things is going to change depending on what the showLUT is, right? So that's one reason why things are critical, because if you have a creative intent and an intent for your images, if you are looking at your image rendered under a similar pipeline to the one that it will ultimately be rendered under, it means you are in for far less surprise. It means you can spend more time making meaningful changes to your image as opposed to going like, I don't know, fill it in a third of a stop. Who knows? Like your precision goes up in terms of like what we are equipping our production counterparts with by providing them with that showLUT. That's reason number one why that's important. And you can envision on a big film, especially like a VFX heavy film, like the Marvel films that you referenced, precision matters. Like fractions of a stop matter. Lighting ratios matter. All of the decisions that go into making those frames work, those need as much context and as much precision as we can get our hands on, right? That's number one. Number two, if you think about, again, let's just go to Joker because it's I think a simple example. You'll be surprised to hear that Jill Bogdanowicz is not able to make it out of her grading suite very often, and she's not on set. She was not on the set of Joker. Maybe she turned up for a day or a couple hours here or there to check in on things, but she's got other films to grade, right? That's the case with any colorist grading the caliber of project that you're talking about. So the other critical thing about a showLUT is you have on set, when you're capturing a digital image, you're capturing a log image that has to be processed, and there's a DIT and there's a dailies colorist on set. There are lots of other people with the ability to manipulate that image whose job it actually is to manipulate the image and to make adjustments for the DP. So the other thing that's critical about a showLUT is it gives those people a fair shot at aligning with the creative intent of the colorist, of aligning with the methodology of the colorist, okay? Because it's not fair if I'm the colorist on a project and then there's a dailies colorist grading on set and I tell them, well, you're just supposed to magically make the same decisions that I would if I were the person there on set and produce the same results that I would if I were there on set. Well, that's not really fair. They're a different person. They have different tastes. They have different experience. They're going to have a completely different set of decisions than I will. But at the same time, that is what I want. I do want someone on set. I want the dailies colorist to be making decisions that are in support of and align with the methodology that I will bring to the table when I'm grading in post-production, right? Best way to do that, absolute best way to do that is with a showLUT, because that provides a common foundation. And then you can even go further than that, and this is very common, especially for larger movies. You'll have color decision lists that are actually like, hey, here's your main showLUT, and here's a color decision list that Jill or someone else built for the day exteriors, or for this scene, or for this sequence in the movie, or for the flashbacks in this movie that represent one-to-one decisions they made using their controls under their LUT that the dailies operator can invoke and apply without being given the impossible task of like, okay, we want you to be an artist, but we want you to basically be a ghostwriter and just flawlessly mimic what this other person is ultimately going to do. That's not really reasonable to expect, and it's certainly not a very fun job to do. So this is a way of sort of aligning that methodology and keeping it consistent all through the production pipeline. So the showLUT thing is absolutely critical, along with things like a CDL. And then the other part that really closes that loop, as I said, is collaboration and trust and dialogue between the supervising or the senior or the lead colorist and the dailies colorist who's there on set and making adjustments for the cinematographer or the production team and all the production counterparts. That's the final link in the chain that ensures that, hey, from the very beginning, we are very precise in terms of understanding what we're trying to capture and in knowing that the decisions that we are making are being made with as much available context as possible. Hope that helps.
Got two related questions here. A-Main asks, how would you color manage a feature film that requires both a DCP and a TV release? And Christian is also asking, what's the order of operations for a theatrical release that has streaming deliverables? Do you do HDR first, then theatrical, then SDR?
Yeah, these are very related questions and good ones to ask. So it's like, how do we think about our grade basically when we don't have one deliverable or one viewing environment? So I'm going to zoom out on that just a little bit and answer it in more of an abstract way to begin with. So here's something that I try to explain to the people who I work with, and a philosophy that I try to remember as well. It's like, okay, let's say that, like this is my, my first frame from my movie. Okay. And I've done all kinds of stuff to it. So I've got like, let's get some of my core elements LUTs in here. Let's say like we've really developed this whole look for the movie. And it's like, we've like done our key output game. We've got this whole like nuanced look that we are really happy with for the film. Okay. And then on top of that, I've gone through and I've done my first pass and I've actually graded the movie. I've done a full grade. I've done the second pass. I've locked it. This is the final grade, right? I'm standing in my color grading suite right now. You can't see my reference monitor, but it's off to my right. You're looking at my GUI monitor here. But if I point at my reference monitor and I say, is this my grade? And if I press play and watch through, it would intuitively seem, yeah, that's the grade. But that's not my grade. This is a window into my grade. My grade is this big, large thing that paradoxically I will never actually get to see. Does that make any sense? Does that sound insane? In a 2022, in a color managed working context, you will never actually get to see your whole image all at once, because your whole image, your grade, is happening here. DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. There's no display that can reproduce DaVinci Wide Gamut primaries and the dynamic range of DaVinci Intermediate. So all you're getting, no matter what you're mastering for, P3, HDR, SDR, whatever you're mastering for, all you're getting is a particular window, a particular lens into your image. Okay? So in that sense, it really just becomes a matter of preference when you're talking about like, oh, well, which is more important, the HDR or the SDR? Like, well, it's not that one's more important. And in fact, they're not different. They're the same thing. They're different windows into the same image, And I know all kinds of colorists who it becomes almost like a religious conviction. They're like, always, always, always the SDR and then the HDR as a trim. Or always, always, always the theatrical and then the, TV or streaming as a trim. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on that. I've done it both ways, and I've yet to arrive at that religious conviction, simply because I tend to think of it in that more sort of soft, open-ended way of like, well, it's all just the grade. It's all just the image, and your decisions are going to change and maybe be trimmed and altered slightly depending on the vantage that you are getting into that image. But ultimately, the image is the image, and as I said, paradoxically, you'll never actually get to see the image. So that's a sort of uncomfortable reality that we have to get comfortable with, I think, as colorists in 2022. And when it comes to the mechanics of like which one of these should I do first, second, or last, I personally have not perceived a huge difference one way or the other. Either way, your decisions when you grade in SDR, when you look at it in HDR for the first time, you're going to have certain shots, certain moments, certain parts of certain frames where you go, that doesn't really feel right. That doesn't travel exactly as I envision it to this new viewing context. And I need to make a localized compensation, a trim adjustment for this viewing experience. And that's, of course, what colorists do. It's not exactly a reach to do those things. So that's going to happen either way, no matter what you start with. So I don't see a huge advantage or disadvantage to starting with one versus the other. And then just to clarify at the beginning of the first part of the initial question, how do you handle grading for multiple environments? Of course, like the nuts and bolts of it are you grade for a display that, like my display here is Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4. So I'm targeting that. I do my grade for that. If we then want to take this grade into a DI theater, we would take it in there, and I would flip my output color space over to, like P3 DCI and change my tone mapping to get it down to like the 48 nit level or whatever the level was of that particular projector, and then watch down the movie expecting that in general my grading decisions are going to hold up and that there are going to be localized instances where I need to compensate for things feeling different in this different viewing context. Hope that helps.
On a similar note, Post Color Gear is asking, do you have a suggestion for exporting HDR? I ask because I've exported Rec. 2020 tags in the past and it worked on a phone, but not on a television.
I don't have a suggestion for that. The last time I played with it was a few years back, and I think it's gotten better in Resolve. But my only experience with HDR has been working with streaming services like Netflix, who are not shy about telling you exactly how they expect you to export it. And of course, we're very happy at Cullen Kelly Color to follow those instructions. But that's the only HDR that I've played around with. I actually would like to go and you've put a bug in my brain that maybe I'll go play around with that a little bit. But I haven't ever done any like exporting HDR for general web or for general consumption. It's always been in the context of like, this is the 1000 nit master for HBO, and we expect it to be encoded in this exact way.
Question from Coer. What's a new thing about color grading or color science you learned recently?
Ooh. What's a new thing about color grading or color science that I learned recently? Gosh. I'm trying to think about what I've learned recently on those fronts. I can't think of anything at the moment. I've been so like in the mode of getting work done and getting running this company. I'm sort of overdue for some laboratory time. I'll put it that way. I was stealing a little bit actually before we started the show today and just playing around with stuff for its own sake. But I've been sort of in action mode and less in sort of a learning mode. So I don't have a satisfying answer for you, but I'm really grateful to you for asking me that question, because it is illuminating the itch that I've been feeling in general to go back to the well and go learn some new stuff. So thanks and sorry.
All right, Kashif is asking, can we create a showLUT based on reference images or paintings? What's the right approach to doing that?
Oh, great question. So this is something that I've talked about in various venues before. We talk about it quite a bit in the Colorist Career Accelerator, but really the fundamental question here is like, all right, what do we do with this whole reference images thing? And some of you guys may have heard me kind of give my prescription for this in the past, but here's my prescription. Regardless of whether we're talking about a showLUT, like a showLUT is just a vehicle, right? Like, so this could be a look you're developing. This could be a single shot match of like, hey, I want you to make this image look like that image. And we're not trying to produce a broader scale match. Like the application of what I'm about to say is pretty far reaching and should work in all those contexts. The way that I like to think about this is the number one thing that you want to remember about reference images. At least this is my perspective as a professional colorist whose job it is to make the client happy. Okay, so that is not the only perspective that a person creatively mastering motion images could be operating from, but that obviously is mine. From that perspective, my take on reference images, the number one utility of reference images, what I look to a reference image to give me, a reference image is an opportunity to get to know my client better. That's really it. Like, there's just so much bad information, especially like, I like to think that the information on YouTube about color grading has gotten better over the last couple of years, and I hope that I've contributed to an increase in that quality. But one of the most like distasteful strains of misinformation on YouTube about color grading has to do with matching looks. About like here with enough stacked up qualifiers and power windows and contortions and distortions of your image, you can bend this frame to look like that frame. That's not meaningful. That's not useful. That's not practical. What is meaningful, useful, practical is when a client says, hey, I'm really excited to grade this with you, and I've got these reference images that I pulled together. And you reply by saying, okay, cool, let's take a look at them. And you take a look at them, and it just becomes an opportunity to ask questions. Because reference images in a vacuum, like, you're never going to make, like, let's just like make it a closed environment here. Let's say like, oh, we want to make, I don't know, like we want to make this shot. Our reference image that we were given for this shot was this shot. Like, well, what does that mean? It's a completely different context, subject, intent. Like, if I really try to literally take that go about that task, I'm not going to get very good results. But what I can do is just ask a client, hey, that's cool. That's a beautiful image. I totally see why you selected it as a reference image. Why do you like it? What do you like about it? What do you find compelling about it? What do you think? What relevance do you think it has to your images? Those are all the kind of questions that I try to ask. And ultimately, what I try to do when I'm using a set of reference images is identify and borrow 1, 2, no more than 3 things from that image that I feel like are resonant ideas that I can borrow successfully and apply to the images that I'm grading. So that might be something like, oh, I like how the shadows feel rich, but they're still soft. That might be one. I like how the color palette feels expressive, but not garish. You know, I'm just using words and making stuff up here, but really starting like honing in on like, what's a flavor, what's a taste that image leaves in my mouth that I feel like I can borrow or that I'm inspired to apply to these images and that I can get good results with. No one's ever going to watch my work that I apply after being given reference images and go like, oh, clearly they were looking at, like Billy Wilder films from the 50s or whatever, or, like 90s action films. That's never going to happen. It's all about getting to know the client, building rapport, building trust with the client, understanding their taste, and then finding 1, 2, like I said, maximum of 3 things that you can go, that's interesting. Let's try a little bit of that and season it onto my image. And when it comes to like, how do you actually go about the mechanics of borrowing that thing and applying it? That's where experience and skill come in to play for sure. But the big principles there are going to be the same principles that I'm always preaching to you guys that I talk about in my book, The Colorist 10 Commandments, all the time. Simplicity beats complexity. Broad beats narrow being the 2 that sort of immediately jump to mind there. Like, you want to find big, soft solutions that gently sort of nudge the image in the direction that you're trying to make it go. And honestly, asking that question, how can I broadly, softly, and in a sort of like system-wide way get this flavor that we like in that image onto these images, that is a fantastic exercise for getting more comfortable with your tools and with your craft. So I can't give you a pat answer of like, here's how you're always going to do that, regardless of what you're trying to match and what you're working with. But it's an incredibly valuable exercise that you can undertake even if your client's not asking you to match a set of reference images, and you're going to learn a ton. You're going to become a better colorist as a result. So I got a little long-winded there, as I'm wont to do, but I hope that is some useful ideas and hopefully a helpful, fresh perspective on the real role of reference images in a professional grading workflow.
Okay. Thomas is asking, are there any other options for gamut mapping for Rec 709 other than ACES reference gamut compression or saturation compression? ACES gamut compression and DaVinci saturation compression both seem to shift hues quite a bit.
Oh yes, Thomas, I'm glad you asked that question. This is a question that I am asking myself fervently lately. So the short answer is, well, the short answer is there's like one right now. Gamut mapping. This is a fun topic. I actually recently had a conversation, had the privilege to have a conversation with a gentleman named Dr. Jan Morovic, who literally wrote the book on gamut mapping. He's had a long career at Hewlett-Packard, and he actually works in gamut mapping in the application of print, where it's a lot harder, where it's like, geez, the shape of the source gamut and the destination gamut are wildly different, and we have to find a way to map the colors of the original image to the available colors within the destination media in a successful way. But I had a recent conversation with him with really my big burning question that I wanted to ask was like, are we like kind of in the Stone Age with gamut mapping with motion imaging? And he was like, yes, we are. Yes, we absolutely are. Or you absolutely are, because he's really not in the motion imaging field as much. So we don't have a lot of robust options. That's something that is in my sandbox big time, something that I'm playing around with and have been coding whenever I have free time to play with. But the one caveat that I want to throw out is, let's just bypass our color management for a second and reset everything. There is some really good gamut mapping in the new ACES candidates. So the ACES 2.0 output transform candidates, ACES 2.0 is not out yet, but you can get your hands on the candidate transforms. And I believe we've talked about this and posted links in the community, made follow-up posts with these links, but I can link them again to you guys. But basically, once you install these candidate transforms, if I look at specifically ACES 2 candidate C, Rev 9 is what I happen to be working with, Rec 709. This has a much more robust form of gamut mapping than we get with the other flavor of ACES gamut compression. Like if we look at the gamut compressed type here, the gamut mapping happening here on output in this candidate transform, totally different methodology, much more robust methodology. I've been using this transform quite a bit and really, really enjoying it. So that's number one. Here's the other one that's even more opaque to me because it comes from private industry as opposed to an open source group. But the new LogC4 to Rec 709 transforms, the whole new family of ALF4 transforms that came out with the Alexa 35, these appear to me to have some much more sophisticated gamut mapping that does not introduce the same crazy level of hue shift that we do tend to see with like normal gamut mapping methods. And really the reason we see that is because normal gamut mapping, like standard gamut mapping methods in Resolve and in ACES, they're really just taking your RGB and either clipping or compressing things into the appropriate range. But when you do that, you're changing the ratio of red to green to blue in that area of the image. So that's really why we see that hue shift and why gamut mapping needs to happen ideally in some sort of color science tangent, but in some sort of perceptually uniform cylindrical space is typically the more successful domain for big kid gamut mapping like Dr. Moravec does and like they employ in that ACES2 candidate. So I would look at both of those things. You could look at this ACES2 candidate output transform, or you could look at doing area log C4, like the log C4 to Rec 709 output transform here, and then just doing a color space transform upstream because we now have area log C4. So I'm just going to map into area wide gamut 4 from area wide gamut 3 like so. And now you would have kind of like a 2-piece output transform that to my eye has some better hue linearity than typical gamut compression options. So great question. Wish I had a much better state of affairs to relate to, but at least that's a couple things that you can explore and play around with. And keep asking that question because we deserve better gamut mapping as artists than we currently have. All right, we got time for one more.
All right, last one from Jonathan. How do you feel about AI and its role in color grading moving forward? Is it a gimmick or is it a technology that should be embraced? So, for example, Color Lab AI or any other the tools and results built-in tools that are coming out.
Oh, I'm glad this question came up. I haven't had the chance to talk about this so much yet. Here's what I would say. How do I put this? My reply across the board, whether you're asking me if AI is good for cars or assembly lines or like bank security, literally anything, my reply is the same. If it can do the job better or faster or both than a person, it should. And I just do not believe that a functional and evolving society is going to suffer as a result of that. Like, I don't believe that tasks that can be automated, that people should have to perform them, Like, that's not fun. And if you look at AI, it's not something that I've slogged a ton of hours doing, but no one is suggesting, for example, that like the type of look dev that I love to do, or that, like the complex creative color science that I had a long chat with my friend Steve Yedlin about in my last creative color science course, where we're looking at, he was kind enough to give us a tour into like his stack and his development environment for the way he builds his like beautiful transforms that are used on Knives Out and now Knives Out 2, which I'm very excited about. You look at those things, no one that I've heard is suggesting, hey, pretty soon Steve Yedlin and Cullen Kelly and people who, and like Dr. Mitch Bogdanowicz, like color scientists and people doing the highly sophisticated, like project specific creative color science that makes motion images really special. Pretty soon those people are all going to be out of a job. I haven't heard that before. I've heard things like, yeah, AI is going to start to play more and more of a role in like, the first pass of a color grade, or in shot matching, or in shot balancing. So I just feel like, cool. Like if AI can do that, awesome. I'm not going to miss those things. And as anyone knows who's ever color graded anything before, if you buy me an hour of extra time over here, it's not like I'm going to be like, gosh, what should we do now? You're just going to find something else probably more meaningful to the end result to occupy your time with. You follow what I'm saying? So the things that I love most about color grading that turn me on, working with clients, finding complex solutions to specific narrative and visual challenges, tailoring things for specific images based on my taste and my experience and what I love about motion images, those things do not seem to me to be in imminent danger of overtake by AI. And if those things are indeed overtaken by AI, I guess I'll have to go and get more serious about my golf career. But in the meanwhile, AI seems to be, if we look at it across all industries and disciplines, the water level seems to be rising for tasks that probably most of us are not that fired up to be doing anyway. So I say bring it on. Long answer, but I hope that's gives some. I hope that's an interesting perspective. Anyway, that's a great place to end, and a great wrap to a very fun Friday morning session. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here. Gadali, thanks for co-hosting with me, buddy.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So I hope you guys all go have a fun Friday. I hope your gears are turning and that you're thinking about color grading and new questions and ideas more so than when we started our time together. I know I am. So go have a great Friday. Go have a great weekend. And I'm going to see you guys next week. And we'll do it all over again. Everyone have an awesome weekend. Great to see y'all. See you real soon. Take care.